I'd like to welcome all of those of you who have taken the time out in their busy schedules to join us this evening. We have a special welcome, first and foremost, to our two panelists, who together bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in their respective fields. And secondly, to the incredible team at TR Brand Communications and Events for putting this webinar together. Our first speaker is going to be Advocate Raynard Looch, who's currently the managing partner of Klaas, Looch & Associates. He obtained his BA LLB at Pretoria University and joined the Department of Justice in 1983 and was admitted to the bar as an advocate in 1984. He has served as a prosecutor in the mining court, which has covered the OHS court, until resigning in 1986, together with other prosecutors, to form Klaas, Looch Associates, after they had identified a need to offer employees a specialized service. Since 1986, he has successfully represented many employees in criminal matters pertaining to the occupational health and safety legislation, and is the author of the book titled The Guideline to the Machinery and Occupational Safety Act. He has delivered many papers on the OHS Act and regularly writes articles for a variety of specialized magazines. Our other panelist, Mr. Seirlis, is currently enjoying his retirement and is consulting for the Amashoba Projects company in his spare time. Ari broke his neck in a diving accident in 1985 while modeling for a TV commercial in Durban, becoming a quadriplegic. After 6 months of rehabilitation, he chose entrepreneurship as a means of becoming economically active. An export clothing manufacturing business, signage company, a frozen yogurt franchise, and several other ventures saw him become one of 3 finalists in the Durban Chamber of Commerce Business of the Year. He later became the chairman and then CEO from January 1997 till January 2020 of the QuadPara Association of South Africa, where he led the strategic plan to develop the full potential of quadriplegics and paraplegics that has seen the organization grow and serve its thousands of members with interesting and meaningful projects. His friendship with the late Christopher Reeve was acknowledged internationally, and his relationship building skills are legendary. Ari's hobbies include fly fishing, hand cycling, where he has competed in the New York Marathon in 2000 and 2010, and quad biking, where he has completed the Quads for Quads off-road ride from Johannesburg to Durban 9 times. We hope that by the time the end of this discussion happens, you will leave with a far better understanding of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, your legal responsibilities and their potential consequences should your building not comply, an understanding of the very real issues and fears that greatly affect the mobility impaired about being in a multi-story building and their safe evacuation should an emergency arise, and the knowledge that we at Evac+Chair have a solution to assist you, not only locally, but internationally as well. Let me start with a brief introduction to Evac+Chair. The Evac+Chair was born out of necessity when David Egan's wife, who suffered from childhood polio, had to be evacuated from her office on the 38th floor in New York, where employees' offices were situated. Only the good fortune of a false alarm and a relay of fellow office workers enabled her to escape, despite it being very slow and with great difficulty. Since David Egan's original design was launched in 1982, there have been 5 major design revisions, as well as new models being introduced that have greatly changed and enhanced the Evac+Chair's performance and ease of use by the operator. The Evac+Chair was used in more than 6 safe evacuations from the World Trade Center during the 9/11 disaster by those people who chose to use the chair. The story of John Abrizio's escape from the 69th floor in an Evac+Chair with the help of his colleagues has been well documented, and the Evac+Chair used by him was inducted into the 9/11 Museum, where it's currently on display. The sad part is that not much is known as to how many other wheelchair users who believed that they would be carried to safety by firemen and were instructed to wait in areas of safe refuge, which is normally the stairways, while non-disabled evacuations descended the stairs around them. Further evidence points to the fact that the disabled were abandoned by those appointed to assist them in their panic to get out of the building. The stay put principle in place in the UK contributed greatly to the loss of the 72 lives in the Grenfell Towers fire that took place in West London on the 14th of June 2017, whilst people remained in their flats, again waiting for the fire department to arrive and get them out. That same principle of stay put is in place here in South Africa as well, and we are heading towards our own Grenfell Tower disaster at some stage. The responsibility of an evacuation procedure for the mobility impaired in multi-story buildings such as office blocks, hotels, apartment blocks, shopping centres, etc., rests with the building owners, managers, body corporates, or any other types of body which has a responsibility for the safety and maintenance of such buildings. With that, let me hand over to our first panelist, Advocate Raynard Looch. Raynard, if you'd take us away, please.
Thank you, Gavin. It's a different picture than initially, but I'm going to click on share screen. And let me just click on my PowerPoint that I've got. And then let me go to Zoom. And let me go to share screen. And I think I found it. And with my bad eyesight, let me click on slideshow from the beginning. Everybody see it?
We can see it.
Okay. So I was looking at the title, Creating Safer Spaces for the Mobility Impaired. And that prompted me to actually focus more on the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Of course, there is, as you'll see, the Constitution, which prevents discrimination against persons, whether able-bodied or mobility impaired. And of course, the National Building Regulations, which are really subservient to the Occupational Health and Safety Act and actually incorporated into the Occupational Health and Safety Act, as well as the standard, which is SANS 10400 Part S, is actually part of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So this is just my tester slide. I've got all my particulars on there. People are welcome to email me afterwards with questions as well. I will get back to them. But let's start with Section 24 of the Bill of Rights to the Constitution, which states that everyone has the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. And since buildings, if we focus on buildings in which we live on, integral part of our environment, the implication is that constitutionally they must be safe for everyone, including persons with disabilities. So that is the supreme law of the land. Every other piece of legislation must gel with this with the Constitution. If it doesn't, it has to be repealed and or amended. But let's look at the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the duties of employers. And I'm not going to merely focus on employers. A tenant is invariably an employer, but an owner of a structure, a landlord, a management for a landlord could apply as well. And we have what is most probably the section that I see most on criminal charge sheets. I'll talk a little about civil liability where people sue for damages, but I'm going to focus primarily on criminal liability where people are punished. And I need to warn you that the fines, those of you who may not be compliant listening, the fines can rocket up to 5 million rand, or I think 5 years in prison. I have a slide on it. We have a new piece, not really a new piece of occupational health and safety legislation, but an amendment to the act. So not an entirely new act. Apparently, Cabinet has approved this draft OHS, let's call it amendment bill, and it will be published for comment. And I've got a lot of comment to make. Maybe Gavin, you will have as well, once it's published for comments. But Section 8 is the section that I see so often on a criminal charge sheet or a summons, because invariably it will be employees who are injured and killed at the workplace. Of course, other persons, members of the public, are injured or killed, particularly with local authorities and metros. And Section 8 says you must provide and maintain a safe and healthy working environment as far as is reasonably practicable. There is a definition of reasonably practicable that I won't go into. Now, to provide a safe and healthy working environment for employees means everybody. Employees, able-bodied, and employees with disabilities. So that is so broad, it covers everything. And that carries soon a very severe penalty. If an employee is injured because an employer failed to provide that employee with a safe and healthy working environment, we have a unique crime, a negligent injury crime, which does exist outside the Mine Health and Safety Act and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. If an employee, as you mentioned, Gavin, people told to wait for firemen and they succumb on a staircase, that is a culpable homicide potential charge. And that means a criminal record for the rest of your life. And that means if you're a director of a company, you may be another Dudu Muyeni and be declared a delinquent director. So Section 8 is so broad, it covers everything. Section 9, it's called the general duties of employers and self-employed persons to persons other than the employees. Obviously, you have a duty as an employee to visitors, non-employees, and it's a very basic provision, but it is essentially that you must provide every single person, whether they're a visitor or a contractor, to your building with a safe and healthy working environment. I see it on charge sheets, particularly with local authorities. They are extremely delinquent these days when it comes to occupational health and safety, and delinquent in many other ways. But one of the most important sections, I believe, for you, Gavin, is Section 10, with a very broad title, the general duties of manufacturers and others regarding articles and substances for use at work. But written within Section 10, they place duties on designers of articles. An article is not defined in our Act, but it is a building, and it's been established in many cases that it is a building. So if a designer, which could be an engineer, could be defined as an engineer or an architect, fails to comply with the national building regulations and the standards that are incorporated into those regulations, then it is an offense in terms of Section 10. Your product is also an article which you supply. And if there's any standard that's applicable, obviously you have to comply with that particular standard. Broadly, it says any article that you supply or you manufacture must be safe, must be without health risks, must comply with every single piece of legislation that exists in this country and every standard that is incorporated in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And you'll recall at the outset, before we started, we spoke about your potential competitors who may have inferior products. If that product is not safe and without health risks and not compliant with legislation, that is a criminal offense. And if people are injured or die as a result of this inferior product, I, as a prosecutor, would charge them with either culpable homicide, which is manslaughter in many countries, or with this unique injury offense, which we have in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So Section 10 is a very important section. In fact, I would say the last 90% of my criminal matters, including a building that collapsed, a flammable store in Durban, killing 2 people, we looked to Section 10 because that article was a building and it collapsed. And the person, the fall guy, in my view, is the architect. Potentially the engineer as well, both defined as designers in the construction regulations. Then sadly, right at the end, we've got environmental regulations for workplaces, Regulation 9, fire precautions and means of egress. And it's a long regulation, and I thought in the time, I'm not going to put it on the slide. Folks, look at it. It tells you exactly what material you must use, handrails, steps, clearance of emergency exits, where are practical dual exits, etc. I've got it written down, but I thought it's going to be a long slide. Perhaps the duty to inform is another regulation we could look at. Every single employee, whether able-bodied or with disabilities, must be made conversant with the hazards at the workplace and the precautionary measures against those hazards. It's also a section, although it's called duty to inform, it's really a conversancy, a very strong word. You must fall off the throat, man. You must fully understand what the hazards are to you, let's say, as a disabled person. Then Section 38 in brackets 2, I won't go into it. Dogs, no, sorry, my dogs, it's playtime for my dogs. Is this negligent injury offense? Now, people say, but surely if you drive a vehicle negligently and you injure or kill somebody, let's say injure somebody, that's a negligent injury offense. It isn't. It is negligent driving we punish, not the injury. In the Mine Health and Safety Act and in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, we have this unique crime. I think it carries currently a 200,000 Rand fine or 2 years in jail or both, which will rocket to 5 years, or I think 5 years in jail. And that could be the corporate body. You remember the Criminal Procedure Act has a section which punishes juristic bodies, companies, or corporate bodies, as it does for human beings. A company can be convicted of culpable homicide. People often aren't aware of that. It's been happening since time immemorial. The British had a problem. They didn't have legislation publishing companies for killing people, whether they're employees or persons. And they introduced about a decade ago a statute called corporate manslaughter. But we are ahead of them for once, and we've had it since time immemorial. I've put Section 14 on, general duties of employees to the employers. I'll be focusing now on employers and their duties to the employees. And I should also mention that Section 10, something I forgot, originated long before 1993, when this Occupational Health and Safety Act was enacted. It was in the 1983 piece of OHS legislation. So any building that is designed or erected or installed must comply with the national building regulations and whatever standard was applicable at that stage. So that's very important to state. Section 10, I'm a believer in Section 10. But why I put section 14 on, folks, is because employees are often not told that what their duties are, and particularly the one I've highlighted, that they have a duty to report an unsafe or unhealthy situation. And I think that's very important for people with disabilities. They must raise their queries. They cannot be discriminated against by legislation if they make a noise about or they're unhappy with a situation in a building or at a workplace. The law is quite clear. You cannot discriminate. I can take it or they can take it even to the Chief Inspector, Department of Employment and Labor. So folks, remember, you don't just sit back and accept what your employer does. You have a duty in law. And what is the opposite of a duty? A right. You have a right to bring it to your employer's attention. Health and safety committees, for example, but they often don't function so well. People just go through the motions. But you have a right to approach the Department of Employment and Health. So I won't go into some of the other duties as well. Folks, I just put this one on to demonstrate to you how stupid some lawyers are, I think. It's an indemnity. And it says that this is where I buy all my garden plants. It says the owner, management, and members of staff shall not be liable to any visitors for any accident, damage, or injury of whatsoever nature occasioned or suffered by them whilst on these premises, whether or not such loss is the result of any intentional, can you believe it, assault, reckless or negligent act or omission on the part of the owner, management, or staff member. That would be thrown out of court. But I thought let's mention indemnities because I've been focusing on criminal law, but there's also civil law. You can sue, and Ari knows all about it. Unfortunately, if you are an employee, you cannot sue in this country, and people are very unaware of that. And that is the QuadPara Act you see on the side, section 35. If you die and you have dependents, you can only sue the compensation fund. People, I often at workshops, pre-COVID days, when there were a lot of people sitting around, I'd say, if you get injured or you die at the workplace, can you sue or can your dependents sue your employer, even if they were negligent? And the majority stick up their hands and say, yes. And I say, hell no, you can't. You can only sue the fund to which your employer is contributing. It is a no-fault fund. If you negligently injure yourself, you will be compensated as well. And I think that was my last slide, folks. Was that too short? And now I don't know what to do.
Thanks very much, Raynard. We appreciate your input. We're going to now hand over to Ari. Ari, are you there to start yours?
Good evening, guys.
Hi, Ari.
There we go. Sorry.
Okay. I just want to check, Gavin, is there anybody left in this webinar?
Yes, Ari.
Because after Raynard, I thought most people would have jumped the ship and got the hell out of here. But no, well done, Raynard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone, for allowing me to share this platform. Now that Raynard has brought the stick, I want to introduce you to the carrot, and talk about, from a user's point of view. I have used an Evac+Chair, and I am a person with a mobility impairment, and it's a great privilege for me to be on this platform. It's a platform that I'm knowledgeable on, and I'm a strong lobbyist and advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. So once again, thanks. I'm going to share my screen on and off during my talk, just to make a point about some of the things I'm talking about. And so bear with me with the technology. And I must warn you, I haven't seen the list of participants, but I know occasionally I've seen a message in the chat box of somebody that I have recognized. And if you rebel rouse or make an inappropriate comment or put your hand up and I see you're going to take me on this platform, I've got a direct line to Uber Eats. And when your doorbell rings and you think it's a yummy, yummy hamburger, I want to give you some advice. Just don't take a bite of that. So I've got the list of the participants. So I've got my ways and means of introducing a response if things go pear-shaped here on this platform. Okay, so I'll open my slides up in a second. I just want to, I'm going to talk about the freedom and value proposition of investing in safety. And if you look at that first slide, at a cartoon on the slide, you know, there's a lady using her wheelchair, and in case of fire, do not use elevator, use stairs. And I'm going to, the last slide will have the other cartoon of how she actually does get out of the building. And then just quickly, I'm going to quickly talk about my transition from confinement and independence, from confinement to independence, actually. Legislation and compliance versus safety and liability. I'm going to reflect on triumphs and disasters in this space, and then I'm going to give you a value proposition offering. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I had a diving accident at Durban's Waterworld in 1985, and I think this will just put my talk into perspective. I broke my neck. I was 23 years old, and my life changed. I'd been to a great school. I'd studied at UCT, and been to the army. I was a parabat in the army, and I served with the Bushman trackers in the war in Angola. And so I was this young, active person, and now rendered quadriplegic. Anyway, in the beginning parts of my rehabilitation, there were three profound elements which started my journey. And I'll tell you about two of them. Is a doctor came to me soon after my surgery and sat on the side of my bed and said, "You're a quadriplegic, you know, you're never going to walk again." And I couldn't spell the word. But anyway, he sort of described what my life would be like. He said, "You won't be able to do this, and you won't be able to do that, and you'll never do this, and you'll never do that. And quadriplegia will decide for you this and decide for you that." And so I decided, no, quadriplegia. I will tell quadriplegia how it's going to cope with my life. I'm going to live my life as operationally as I can. And quadriplegia, you just come along this journey with me, and you give me a sign if there's something I need to give you some attention. And you're not going to define who I am. I accept you into my life for the moment, and but I've got things to do. And then an occupational therapist or physiotherapist, I can't recall, was the next person sent to give me some bad news. And she sat down next to my bed and said, "You're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life." And I think it's a sentence that nobody ever wants to hear. And you won't be able to go here, and you won't be able to go there, and you won't be able to do this, and you won't be able to do that. Look, rehabilitation has changed over the years, but this was in 1985 in Addington Hospital. So I decided, wheelchair, you're coming on with me. You're not going to tell me where I must go. I'm telling you where I want to go. And so my journey using the wheelchair started. And there's a point for me telling you this story. So that wheelchair, after my rehabilitation finished, had to take me to further skills. And in the college I went to, I studied an IMM. I did one or two other courses. I ended up doing a course at Gibbs, which was social enterprise course in entrepreneurship. It then took me to employment. It took me to self-employment, which takes me into buildings, And then, of course, I realized I need to get out of buildings. So part of my journey, part of my confinement is and was, can I get into buildings? And Raynard did a good job about explaining the national building regulations, which I guess say over the years now have been acknowledged and are applied, not always strictly, but we do get in. The problem is getting out of buildings is often a big challenge. And that's what causes anxiety and stress and a lot of problems for us people with mobility impairments. If you ask me, what are the two things that I do when I go into a building of more than one story, is I first look where the toilet is, and secondly, look, how am I going to get out if there's a problem? And I actually consciously, and this is not a punt, Gavin, look for an Evac+Chair or an Evac type of chair. I just know Evac+Chair is that device that gets you down the stairs. It's a generic name, but it is your brand. And so part of my journey in life and my mobility challenges is not only getting into buildings now, but being assured that I can get out of buildings. So after self-employment and enjoying a career in business, I joined the QuadPara Association of South Africa, and eventually I became the CEO and did a lot of work in understanding the most effective way of surviving in built environments. And that meant joining a lot of SABS standards, South African Bureau of Standards committees, and being involved in ensuring that standards were in place, etc., etc. And you know, you mentioned it, Gavin. In fact, I'm sure you stole some of my speaking notes here, you know, in your introduction to your product and your company. But the stay put strategy is not for us. We do not subscribe to the stay put strategy. And I don't know if anybody in the audience has read the book, Who Moved Your Cheese? Or Who Moved My Cheese? The mouse that stayed with no food died. And the mouse that went and looked for the cheese survived. And so we don't want to stay put. Yes, we'd like to have an area where that's where we gather. But we don't want to stay put anywhere. We want to get out of a building, however tall it is, and without any damage and with the least amount of discomfort. Let me quickly share my screen again. Okay, I'm going to move that on. So just to give you guys a quick idea, that's a photograph of me just before, 3 weeks before I had my accident. There's my favorite hobby is doing some fly fishing. And I can assure you that one of the opportunities, I mean, I look only for what opportunities does QuadPara offer me? What opportunities did using a wheelchair offer me? Not things that denied me or confined me. And I'll share one of them is I started a great relationship with the late Christopher Reeve, alias Superman, and I've spent some time with him in New York a number of times and got to understand his push for research for cure because he desperately wanted to walk again. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm now in my 37th year as a wheelchair user, and I don't desperately want to walk again. If you gave me 10 wishes, walking again wouldn't be in the top 10. I'll share some of them with you, but not all of them. But certainly having finer agility would be one of them. Having had kids would have been another. So things change. So walking is a bit overrated for me. I think we spend a lot of our time sitting down and lying down. So walking is just a small part of life. I do lots of exercise using a wheelchair. I'm digressing a little bit. Okay, let me move on. Let me quickly talk to you about, I'm going to leave this slide up sharing about the legislation that you need to take note of. Look, Raynard read you the Right Act in terms of the occupational health and safety. I'll quickly tell you about Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. That's called the Equality Act, and that's the acronym is PREPUDA. National Building Regulations, mainly Part S 10400. The UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So if you're in OHS and on this webinar, you really need to know what the UN Convention is. I can email to Gavin, and you can email to anyone on board here. And then, of course, the document that people with disabilities subscribe to and that we watch, very importantly, and that we want integrated into all legislation, it must be domesticated, is the white paper on the rights of people with disabilities. That's the document that we feel gives us rights in this document. Although it's not a piece of legislation, we push for its domestication, into legislation. So just quickly, on Part S, facilities for people with disabilities, in any building contemplated in Regulation S1 requiring facilities for persons with disabilities shall be able to safely enter the building, use all the facilities subject to the provisions under sub-regulation 3 within it, and leave it. Very, very important to understand that. So that's my Part S 10400 contribution, and I'm sure Raynard can give you lots of paperwork to know what you need to know in terms of the National Building Regulations and Part S 10400. Then, under the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, there are 50 articles in this. I'm going to direct you to only one, Article 9 on accessibility. And that states to enable persons with disabilities to live independently and participate in all aspects of life. State parties shall take appropriate measures to ensure to persons with disabilities access on an equal basis with others to the physical environment, to transportation and communications, including information and communication technologies and systems, and to other facilities and services open or provided to the public, both in urban and rural areas. These measures shall include the identification and elimination of obstacles and barriers to accessibility, shall apply to all inter alia, information, communications, and other services, including electronic services and emergency services. So if you need an article in the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, it's Article 9 on accessibility that you must refer to. And then on the white paper on the rights of people with disabilities, there are 9 strategic pillars. And the pillar that you need to take note of is Pillar 1, which is removing barriers to access and participation for people with disabilities. So I don't want to bore you or over inform you with legislation, but that's from the insight of a person with a disability. You really need to know this stuff, and I've given you the various paragraphs that you need to look at. Okay, so let me give you reflections on triumphs and disasters. And I actually know a lot about the 911 story because I've had the opportunity to have gone to the top of both those towers. And after 9/11, I had the opportunity to talk to some of the survivors who are wheelchair users, not John Abruzzo himself. But Gavin referred to the John Abruzzo story earlier, just to absolutely persuade you about the value of an Evac+Chair in a building. And it didn't have to be 101 stories. That in New York in 1993, there was a bomb attack in Twin Towers. And poor John Abruzzo was working there. He was an accountant. He was on the 69th floor. And he was carried in his power wheelchair from the 69th floor to the 44th floor in his power wheelchair by, I think it was 10 people in 6 hours. Then the fire brigade took over and they put him on a stretcher, and I don't know how long they took from there to get him around the corners. It must have been taking them ages. And he survived. That was in 1993. Then in September 2001, he was still on the 69th floor and he was evacuated out of his office down 69 floors in an evac chair in 90 minutes. And as Gavin mentioned earlier, in 2008, that actual evac chair was donated to the 9/11 Museum. And I'll give you a quote. It's here on the screen. It is that the curator of the museum stated, it's an object that reminded us of the particular vulnerability of limited mobility occupants within high-rise infrastructure. So, guys, I know these stories come out of New York, but I mean, we don't want to have a test case here to persuade you the value of an evac chair in the right place. Don't give it to an individual. And in fact, I'll talk about that just now. And then, of course, the Grenfell Tower disaster, which wasn't such a long time ago, in London in June 2017, a 23-story residential building, and most of the people were told, stay put. They implemented a stay put strategy, and about 75 people died. 22 people with disabilities were on the 10th floor. I don't know the specifics of how many of those 70 odd people that died were people with disabilities. But it was a disaster because of the stay put policy which was applied. So my take home from this is evac chair plus an emergency exit plan equals a minimum solution to occupational health and safety in buildings. Now, it's not only about us vocal wheelchair users who demand wheelchair parking and cuck on you when you abuse it for whatever reason you do, if you know, no disrespect to those that don't. But there are so many scenarios where you will find that there's an emerging situation in a building. There's smoke, it's dark, it could be very noisy or it could be dead still. People are screaming, people are shouting. There are people running around, men and women these days, with high heel shoes. And a heel breaks off and you sprain your ankle. You have a panic attack. There are people with mobility impairments. Now, you might know of 2 wheelchair users on floor 4, but you might not know that a contractor is a wheelchair user, that someone using a wheelchair came and visited. So, you wouldn't know how many wheelchair users there are in the building at any one time. Many people become mobility impaired under these circumstances, from anxiety, from a panic attack, as I mentioned, a sprained ankle, and they're scared. They are part of the constituency who also will have the benefit of an evac chair. You will be surprised how many people become mobility impaired in a panic situation. Okay, let me move on to the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, I think there's a carrot in all of this. There's got to be a value proposition, and why would you go to the expense? And someone says, wow, it's very expensive. These evac chairs are expensive, or evacuation is expensive. OHS is expensive. Years ago, there wasn't that acronym. They're not expensive at all. First of all, if you're going to go and buy some deck chair and come up, and your engineering department come up with some contraption with a rope and a pulley to take us out of the building, you're going to suffer tremendous liability. The evac chair is the most announced and the best quality chair out there. It's an essential in a building. If you have it in your building and you're an employer, clearly you have the opportunity of bragging about you will be the employer of choice. People take note of their own personal safety. So you want to be the employer of choice. It's important because if you employ the employer of choice, you have access to much better human capital, and that's good for your business. If you're a residential complex, often safety and security, evacuation, access, circulation is highlighted when marketing these residential facilities. And there's a lot of competition between them in looking for people to come and book and pay and stay. You use it as a marketing tool. The property value of a property that's well kitted out with evacuation chairs and facilities will increase. If you're in a hospital or public service building and environment, you know, it speaks to the principles of Batupele by having good evacuation. And then if you ask me, how do I feel about my evacuation, escape, and extraction? Before I answer that, it's interesting. I picked up a quote from John Abruzzo when I was reading an article, and it says, it's because of the Evac+Chair and those that risk their lives bringing me down that I'm able to write these words. I just want to stop sharing my screen for the moment. Okay, so you've got me back on the screen again. So how do I feel about, you know, evacuation and escape and extraction? If the lift doesn't work, I'm petrified and I get anxious, to be honest, whether it's 1 floor or 10 floors. I don't ever want to be in a situation where 4 people grab my wheelchair and say, we'll take you down the stairs. My wheelchair is not designed to be carried downstairs. Its strength part, the strength of the wheelchair was for the 4 wheels to be on the ground and propelling forward, sideways, or backwards, not to be carried in various positions. I promise you, parts of this chair fall off and come off, and the chair will not sustain a long journey downstairs, nor a power wheelchair, let alone put risk at the people that are assisting you. So if you have willing help, and it's just surprising, human beings are wonderful things. I've always had people say, look, Ari, the lift's not working, we'll carry you down the stairs. I said, no. Bring me an Evac+Chair or phone the fire department. Those are my only 2 options. I do not take the option of being carried down. I don't care how long it takes, but my safety, I don't want to break a leg or break an arm, nor do I want to feel the person helping me down, you know, ruins their back and then will forever rue the day they put their hand up and volunteer to assist me. So when I go into a building, I take note. Is there an Evac+Chair? Is there an evacuation chair on the floor? Yes or no? If no, I'm out of there, to be honest. I'm very fussy now. And is there a toilet? Obviously, if there's no toilet, I'm definitely out of there. I don't stay very long. So I don't want my dignity, compromised, and I don't want my safety compromised. So I hope I've made a point. And I know Raynard read you the Riot Act, and I've emphasized the pieces of legislation that we as people with disabilities refer to. We know our rights, and we just hope that you in occupational health and safety believe in the fact that you really want to offer the best solution for safe evacuation of people with mobility impairs out of building. I will end off with the quote, and I do always, whether it's a talk on human rights or sport, or in this case, safety in and out of buildings, that I coined myself. And, you know, if it makes sense to you, I'll be very pleased. But I didn't come to leave you with my famous quote. I hope I've left you with the carrot, and Raynard's got the stick behind you. And it's this. And I would welcome questions afterwards. I don't know how the facilitator is going to facilitate questions, but I'm going to hang around for some questions if time allows. In all the years I've worked in the disability sector, call it 20 formal years, but of course I've been in the sector for 37 years. But I've worked with many different disabilities, and I've been at the highest level. And in fact, presently, I advise the president on disability in the presidential working group. So my finger's on the tab. If you can see, then you must have vision. If you can hear, then you must listen. And then, of course, if you can walk, then you must walk your talk. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Gavin, and your team.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The reason for me being last is because I tend to talk the hind leg off a donkey. So that's why I've kept very quiet and listened. If there are any questions that you have now, if you would like to pose them so that Raynard and Ari can answer, or I can possibly assist, before I carry on with what I'm wanting to speak to everybody about. You can post your questions now.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to post my email address on the chat box if anybody wants to pick it up.
Ari, thanks
And
very
Naomi
much.
as well. Thanks.
Raynard, would you like to do that as well? Post your email address if people would like to get in touch with you.
Shall I put it in the chat box? Yeah. I'll give the easy one.
Great.
There we go, the easier one.
There we go. I know yours hasn't come through yet. Raynard, yours still hasn't appeared in the chat box.
It has appeared on mine. From me, oh no, it's from me to T. Brand. I must send it to everyone, to all panelists. Okay, to all panelists. There we go. Sorry, I'm a bit. Oh, there, I've lost everything. Let me get back to Zoom. There, to all panelists.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, I haven't yet done it.
It's appeared.
Oh, is it? Has it appeared? Thanks a lot.
Okay. All right. Well, there's some questions. Question answers. Okay. In South Africa, legislation is clearly specified evacuation chairs, or how do they name the devices to evacuate people with disabilities? Raynard, I'm not too sure whether this might be for you. Manuel Manoz, he's from Mexico. He says in South Africa legislation, it is clearly specified evacuation chairs, or how do they name the devices to evacuate people with disabilities?
It's implied. Because Section 10 of our Occupational Health and Safety Act says that every building that you erect or install, and we confine ourselves to buildings, must comply with every piece of legislation as well as any applicable standard. It will be by implication. And then, of course, emergency evacuation and egress doesn't mention it by name, but there's a number of provisions as well. So it's implied. There's no mention in the Act as such yet of what method you must use in terms of evac chairs, etc.
Thanks very much. Just sending a message just to see, I'm sure he will, if that answers his question. All right, well, I'm going to continue just to introduce. Edwards and Buckley Systems trades as Evac+Chair South Africa is one of 2 manufacturing plants in the world. The other plant is based in the UK. We here in South Africa manufacture under license from the UK. The Evac+Chair is the #1 selling and most trusted evacuation chair in the world, and here in South Africa, registered and accredited by the SABS, meeting the requirements of ISO 9001-2015, as well as meeting the exacting international standards of TÜV Nord based in Germany. Our chairs carry a 10-year warranty, which is backed up by on-site training and maintenance. This, being involved in the manufacture of the chair and seeing how the chair gets put together is an amazing process. And, it's a proud moment to be part and parcel of this, and very appreciative of everybody who's come on this evening. And in particular, to thank you, Raynard, and you, Ari, for your time, your precious time, and your invaluable information and knowledge on how our product can better the workplace, the residential homes, the large buildings that are being built. I think that people are looking at construction companies, how they're putting up multi-story buildings, and not a thought goes into the fact that in actual fact, in those buildings, you should have an evacuation plan. And it would be wonderful for us to be able to go and do demonstrations, get on board with companies who are in the building industry, as well as your architects right from inception of that building, for us to get on board and be part and parcel of ensuring the safety of mobility impaired people. Right ahead.
I should just mention, if you can hear me, folks, that should persons be injured, burnt, or killed, and I'm a prosecutor, I would definitely put it to them that had they used an Evac+Chair, this might not have happened. So I will use it in cross-examination, believe me. Even though it is not mentioned by name in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, I would use it as an instrument of cross-examination. And I think it would have a big impact on the judgment if it can be shown that that could have saved lives or prevented injury.
Thanks a lot for that, Raynard. We have a question that's come in, and I think that's pretty much been answered around that question. During the training course, we certify each of the participants that partake in the training course and ask them to redo their certification on an annual basis. For the simple reason that not only do people very rarely use the chair, unfortunately, during their fire drills, but staff move, people aren't there on the days that there might be an emergency, people could be on leave. So we try to train as many people as we can around the use of the chair. We have trained operators who will go out and run courses to show exactly how the chair works. We also have technicians who will maintain your chair for you, to ensure that you're never going to have a problem, that it's always going to be ready for you, should you actually need to use a chair at any time. We know it's a great purchase, but so help me God, the day you do need it, you're going to be grateful that you do have the product. I see there's no more questions at the moment, so I think we're going to call it tonight. And
Gavin,
yes, sorry.
Yeah, before you called it tonight, I mean, you've prompted me, you've poked the bear here now to, respond to a comment. You mentioned, it's a grudge purchase. A grudge purchase for me. Some people say tires are a grudge purchase on their car. I'll tell you the only things that keep you on the road. And then I say a grudge purchase is having to buy a decent hi-fi system for the inside of your car. But people with disabilities have had enough, and we are hurtful, if that's an appropriate word to use, of being told it's expensive and it's a cost, and all of that we forfeit. Our parking bays are 3.5 meters wide, so a shopping center loses parking bays because we need more bays that are 3.5 meters wide. We are a consumer group. That's very important for people to understand. We are employees, we are customers, we are consumers, we are owners, we are we employers. And if you put that into perspective, then it changes your thinking, not yours in particular, but people's thinking when they say, do you know what? A fire extinguisher on every floor, complying with the fire regulations. It's not a grudge purchase. That's it. No one argues. Put the fire stuff in. No one argues. They go over the top with the fire stuff. Then they start scrimping on ramps, on size of lift boxes, on evacuation processes, on parking, on all sorts of elements that often affect the mobility and the circulation for people with disability. So just know the tolerance for the discussion about cost and that we're becoming a nuisance in this space is, we've got past our tolerance level on that. And so you gave me a prompt for me to say that to everybody.
No, Ari, thank you very much for your feedback.
And Ari, you've given me a prompt again now. I didn't put a slide on about the term reasonably practicable. Now, your duties as an employer to your employees or to persons or visitors is tempered with reasonably practicability. And one of the elements is cost versus benefit. And having listened to you guys today, I don't think anyone would be able to argue that the cost outweighed the benefit. So it's another argument I would use if I was a prosecutor in court, if somebody with disabilities was killed or injured in an emergency or fire situation. So thanks for prompting me on that in that regard.
Okay. Gentlemen, thanks very much. We've asked people to stay with us for an hour. That hour's now up. Once again, hold it. Have you got?
All right. And now, because Ari and Raynard have had something to say, one of my lines that I always say to people, what value do you put on a life? And I don't care whether the person is mobility impaired or not, but they might need an evacuation chair. What value do you put on that life? Right. Thanks very much, gentlemen.
From my side, thank you very much. Anytime you can call upon me if you need my input, I would welcome it.
Thanks, Raynard. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Ari, thank you for your time as well. I will have a chat to both of you tomorrow. So enjoy your evenings and thank you very much for giving a bit of time tonight.
Thanks, Ari. Thanks, Yvette. Thanks, Gavin.